I'm Teresa Carraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. I thought that Kitten Seeking Answers couldn't be the only one showing off flowers in her garden that will bloom and die without anyone seeing them because they're in a hidden corner. And so I'm filming outside today. My topic is responding to Matt Taibbi's Magic Monetary Theory Goes Primetime. And because it doesn't lend itself to AI art, and the only joke that I had doesn't work because I was misquoting it, flowers and fancy earrings are the only thing I've got to spice this up. But I will tell a couple of anecdotes at the end that hopefully will give us hope. Let's get started. Matt Taibbi's post starts with a clip of Jared Bernstein, who is Biden's chair of economic advisors, being asked why the government needs to borrow money if the government issues and prints money. And he flubs this so badly that it is pretty funny to see in a scary sort of way. This is a clip from a new film out called Finding the Money. Matt writes, MMT's high priest is the star of Finding the Money. Economist Stephanie Kelton, by all accounts a nice person, and loaded to the gills with the currency of the day, certainty. Kelton is sure deficits are fake, part of an age-old political fraud that cons the public into believing national debt is the reason politicians don't pay for social programs. The penny drops for audience members as Kelton explains that if you turn the graph of government deficits upside down, the story changes. Just as a 6 becomes a 9, when we view it from a different angle, a government deficit becomes a financial surplus. She says, not only are deficits not bad, they're good, because every dollar the government owes is someone else's asset. Therefore, we can change scary headlines about deficits into awesome ones about surpluses. Matt's advice, in a word, is run. He looks at MMT as QE on steroids, quantitative easing gone wild. One of Matt's most famous quotes compares Goldman Sachs to a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money. So he's no fanboy of the banking system, but sees Kelton and crew as selling a feel-good, simplistic, and dangerous solution that would inflate the dollar like a hot air balloon. So I'd like to respond to this from the perspective of my book, How to Dismantle an Empire, and explain why Matt is half wrong and Stephanie is half right. But what I do is look at MMT and home economics and the fact that size matters and whose debt and whose asset it becomes is something we need to pay attention to. Stephanie states that government deficits are good because every debt is someone else's asset. But whose? That's a critical part of the question. Of the $29 trillion national debt, $7.6 trillion is owned by foreign countries, notably Japan and China, who were at $1 trillion each, although China has divested down to $800 billion and counting. Tax haven countries are big holders, like the UK, Cayman Islands, Luxembourg, and Switzerland. Whether they hold them as treasury bonds, notes, or bills, they're all IOUs in exchange for U.S. goods, which we don't produce, or U.S. real estate, which we are cranking up as high-rises in the sun and sand belts. With China, we run a hefty trade deficit of $380 billion a year, although last year that dropped by $100 billion and is still counting. This debt to China was backed by their consumer goods. But where did the money come from to buy U.S. treasuries in the tax havens? The total U.S. mortgage debt is now over $12 trillion, and that doesn't include interest. So that's now at 7%, totaling more than the principal. Together, they might reach $30 trillion over 30 years, or $1 trillion a year. What would happen if MMT did a helicopter drop of $1 trillion a year into everyone's bank accounts? Mortgage and rents would double because they're based on the maximum debt that anyone can afford. So if $1 trillion dropped in, we would now then have $2 trillion that could be siphoned out to all those banks. And with that dilution of the dollar relative to housing, consumer goods and services would also double. So we'd be no better off than before. The $12 trillion that's issued by the banks for mortgage debt is conjured out of thin air, the same way that Stephanie is suggesting that governments do. But their $12 trillion then ends up meaning that they own all the houses, and we work for 30 to 60 years with dual incomes to pay them back. So why let them have that and we conjure money backed by nothing out of thin air that then ends up diluting that? We don't need that $12 trillion. If we took the $3 trillion that is the Social Security Trust Fund, which is a debt the government owes to itself, and that makes absolute sense for them to issue credit in order to cover it. That credit could then become capital for Commonwealth banks. And Commonwealth banks then can issue 10-to-1 debt under the rules of banking. So with $3 trillion, they can issue $30 trillion in debt if they so choose. And then that money goes right back to the Commonwealth Bank, which means that the Commonwealths can issue it as credit in people's accounts without having that add at all to inflation, because that's money that they have coming back, and that's money they can push out so that there is always an equal value and that there is the amount of income in the economy that also is matching the debt that you have for housing. So Stephanie is right that every debt that you have to yourself turns into an asset. If you in the community have inherited the housing from another generation to whom you owe it to have them live out their lives in security and comfort and to pass on the gift in a better form to the next generation, you can, as 17 cities in California now have an average mortgage of more than $1 million, and I'm sure that that includes Santa Cruz. That's ridiculous. But you can put that amount into the community. You can reissue those debts at 3% fixed rates and let people come to you to refinance. And then you can distribute that money in the form of different kinds of subsidies on a monthly basis that encourage things like well care and local food production and home improvement and education. That's the way that I would divide it, and I would start ratcheting that cost of living down for places in California. In other parts of the country, the average is $245,000. So again, whatever you need, you can put into that community, and if you have a higher debt, that means that you have higher assets to distribute, but they're going back to you. And if it were me, I would put things in place that would discourage monopoly and extraction, that would enable things like home ownership, local small businesses, and local small landlords, and that would encourage food production and other kinds of productive activities and services so that we can start taking care of each other. But Matt is right too. Do we really want the federal government to be issuing money for whatever they want and expanding that purse for military endeavors? Ron Paul had said that the U.S. would never have entered World War I had it not been for the Federal Reserve, backed by, of course, Rothschild and Rockefeller. And Rothschild was who was banking the Kaiser. So that was the start of the Great War. That wouldn't have happened. Of course, all wars are bankers' wars, and specifically, they are all backed by Rothschilds who are playing us against each other. So issuing money won't do anything to solve that if it's happening at the federal level. And what Stephanie's suggesting is a very simplistic form of this. It's what everyone wants. Just give us free money. Give us UBI. Robots will do everything for us. Just take care of us, as if that's actually going to be what they do. So we want the ability to take care of ourselves, to take responsibility for ourselves, not for them to take care of us. I think this is the same appeal of Charles Eisenstein's sacred economics. Oh, we're just going to forget about money. We're just going to do things for each other. And no one really gets into the nitty-gritty of how does that work? Who owns the land? Who pays the mortgage? These are things that we need to be thinking through. And I am a housewife. If I can get this and understand it, so can you. As promised, here are a couple of stories that I put in the category of it's too soon to tell, like all of those old fables. A couple of days ago, my neighbor had a painter who was working on his house who dropped a bucket of paint that hit and splattered. And he was busy looking at his 2 trucks that had gotten hit and didn't notice that my car was covered. And so when I noticed, he said, "Let me have your keys. Let me take it to a friend of mine." And so he drove it off. And yesterday I got it back. And it has never looked so good since I bought it. It is incredible. He has a friend who does detailing, and the inside, the outside, everything is impeccable. Friends are saying, stick a for sale sign on it right now. It'll never look this good again. I'm telling my neighbor that he needs to mess up more things for me. He owns the taquerias in town, and so he is in with the Brown Guy Network, who are the ones who do all the work in my town. And then the other story is that I have an Airbnb in my hometown on the East Coast, and the air conditioner wasn't working, and it's very hot right there during a music festival. So my house cleaner went out to get another one, but it was too heavy, and she couldn't get it up the stairs. And so then we contacted the guy who had done the cement work for me on my last visit, and it turns out that he's someone she knew for a long time before and hasn't seen in 5 years. So with all the turmoil in our lives, I really think we need to step back and just say, it is too soon to tell. This may look like something that is going bad, but in the end, it may be exactly what we need, and we're going to look back and say, thank goodness that happened. And for more along those lines, here's what's the best that can happen. And this is Carrotology that explains my carrot program, which is the little symbol shaped like a roof, not the vegetable shaped like a cone. And that's appropriate since it is backed by the housing. Thank you for watching.